for a long and difficult war. It will be conducted on many fronts, but as long as it takes, we will prevail.
The world must decide how to restore the full strength of the rule-based world order, almost destroyed by Russia.
Заговорили о возможности отправки на Украину натовских военных контингентов. Но мы помним судьбу.
One time ago, a crazy dream came to me. I dreamt I was walking into World War III. Is that where we are now? The war between Russia and Ukraine is getting worse and worse, and Macron is threatening to send troops, while Putin recently remarked on Russia's willingness to use nuclear weapons. There have been a number of editorials weighing in on this, and I have friends in Brazil and all around the world who are highly alarmed and truly believe that World War III is imminent. A recent YouGov poll showed that 53% of Britons who were polled believe that global war is highly likely within the next decade. And I certainly hope that's wrong, but it sounds likely. Another interesting thing to note here is the Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, who claims we are already in World War III. I'm certainly a fan of some of Peterson's work and his insights, but I do think he occasionally stumbles into a kind of self-importance that is almost unctuous at times. He's made great points about the decline of basic rights in Canada and the excesses of the left culturally and other aspects. However, I think to say we're already in World War III is sort of a non-meaningful statement. It doesn't help matters. We are not yet in World War III. Otherwise, we would have mass landings, cyber attacks on a global scale, and we would have multiple theaters of war open and active in a much worse way than is currently happening. So I don't agree that we're already in World War III. I have been to Ukraine twice, mostly in the west, Lviv, and the central Ukraine, Kiev, and south of there, Vinnytsia, also Mykolaiv, which is sort of near the middle, and Odessa. And I really loved my time there and the people I met. This was prior to the war in 2019 and 2020, and you couldn't really see what was coming, although there was certainly the ongoing conflict in the East that already started by 2014. However, I think that many people didn't expect it would actually lead to a full invasion of the so-called denazification mission from Russia. And with 500,000 Ukrainians dead and this horrific tragedy, really there's no clear end in sight. So now I want to take a look at some statements from experts. First up is Simon Diggins, a military analyst. He says, in one sense, we are always in a pre-war world, as wars can start from miscalculation, from hubris or misunderstandings, as well as deliberate design. However, the last months have seen some loud rumblings in the sense that the inevitable tensions of a complex world may only be resolvable by war. Nothing is inevitable, but the Ukraine invasion in particular has shown that Russia sees war as an instrument of policy, as a tool to change the world order in its favor, and not simply as a means of defense. Diggins goes on to say that who started this is, of course, moot. While we can point the finger at Russia as a destabilizer, the Russians point to both the 2003 Iraq invasion as an illegitimate use of force, and also what they regard as the structural violence of the eastern expansion of NATO to Russia's borders. The West sees the expansion as a natural and reasonable choice by individual nations. The Russians, who have long regarded themselves as a surrounded people, believe they need a bulwark of friendly or at least compliant countries to protect Mother Russia. It is this disconnect of worldview combined with the willingness to use force that makes the situation in Eastern Europe so very dangerous. Diggins has some fair points here. Both sides are not going to back down here, and Russia's history and current political situation makes it very unlikely to de-escalate in the near future, even though Putin admits that NATO far outguns Russia, which is why he referred to the country's nuclear triad. So definitely I agree with this analyst that Europe and the world is in a pre-war era, and it's very hard to predict how quickly it could be set off. Next up is the perspective from Dominic Waghorn, Sky News International Affairs editor. He says, "We are probably closer than we have been since the end of the Cold War to World War III, but don't be alarmed. There is no need to stock the basement with bullets and beans quite yet. Hotspots are hotter than for a long time, fault lines increasingly tense, and war seems to be proliferating. But the alarm being raised by generals and spooks is a bit of a red herring, and let's face it, they're keen to make the case for bigger budgets and bigger roles. The fact is that conflict with Russia is entirely avoidable if Putin can be persuaded there is no margin in continuing his madcap misadventure in Ukraine. Unfortunately, that is a bigger if than it needs to be." I'm not quite sure what Waghorn is smoking or what he has in his horn here, but I'd say if we're closer to global war than since the end of the Cold War, there probably is a slight need to be alarmed. Moreover, the simply vast loss of human life that didn't need to happen is definitely highly alarming. And to say that the conflict is entirely avoidable only on Putin's side, I am not sure if that is an accurate statement, even though it may sell well at Sky News. So you get these kind of perspectives that are basically just propaganda. And that said, he does make a good point about how the prospect of global war is partly used to push for bigger budgets and more of a role for the intelligence community and generals. Nonetheless, I think that Waghorn seems to have a little bit of a simplistic view of the Ukraine conflict. This brings me to a fairly unhinged column by Sherelle Jacobs, written at the end of January, in which she says the conventional attitude is that if World War III arose, it would be by accident, but we should entertain the possibility that autocratic leaders, tortured by the prospect of death in the event of their fall from power, will be willing to pursue survival strategies that, while rational to us, appear deeply rational to them. They may pose a threat to human survival on par with, say, inadequately secure pathogen labs or the uncontrolled evolution of AI. The risk is amplified in an era when rogue dictators genuinely think that they can win. As it moves to a strike-first nuclear doctrine, Russia is increasingly convinced it has an advantage in the event of nuclear war. The Iran regime, having weathered a generation of isolation, could well be suffering from survival arrogance. Jacobs goes on to advise, the West, if it is to contain the authoritarian threat, will have to make use of what is a perilous trump card of its own unpredictability inherent in being democracies. From the normalization of relations with China in the 1970s, which blindsided the Soviet Union, to the surprisingly robust response to the invasion of Ukraine, the West is feared by its enemies because they can never quite know what it will do next. It may have to roll the dice once more to maintain its supremacy. I'm not sure what dice Jacobs is referring to rolling, but wherever she's sitting in her London office, I'm sure she won't be in any trenches for 3 weeks while getting shot at by people that don't even want to be there. It's just a strange comment, and as well as we see this simplistic moralism where it's side A, side B, and one side is democracy and the other side is evil, and it's just bizarre language on par with Pravda. I mean, you can talk about the fact that Putin is an aggressor and that he has designs on Eastern Europe and all of this without having to get into the us good, you evil argument. It's just totally not worthwhile, especially when we're staring down the barrel of World War III. So where does that leave us? The Biden administration promises it is not sending troops to Ukraine. However, the retired U.S. Army Colonel Alexander Crowther said that this idea does need to be taken seriously. Ukrainian soldiers are dying in massive numbers, and Crowther compared that to 1944, where cooks were being given rifles and told to fight. Ukraine is pushing everyone they can to the front as the war becomes hopeless. Crowther believes that Americans or Western Europeans could help run a tight-knit air defense system and basically block incoming missile attacks over the Dnieper River. And he is somehow claiming this would not necessarily be enough to constitute an incursion against Russia, since it would not be a no-fly zone, but be considered air defense. That's optimistic. However, at least Crowther is talking about real steps. But at this point, it does look like there is not an easy exit out of the war. And there's probably not even a difficult exit. Both sides are entrenched. Ukraine has lost far too many individuals to back down. Russia is committed to its perspective, and the United States is fully in at this point. I am going to keep following this closely and keep viewers updated. Thanks for watching.